Sometimes the most profound moments of our lives come from the most unexpected teachers. For firefighter Marcus Hale, that teacher was a golden retriever who showed him what true heroism really means. Marcus was trapped in a burning house when a beam collapsed and knocked him down. A golden retriever named Bailey appeared through the smoke. Marcus thought the dog would lead him to safety. Instead, Bailey led him deeper into the fire to save a little girl nobody knew was still inside. The dog risked everything to make sure that child made it out alive. How did Bailey know exactly where to find Marcus in all that smoke and chaos? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks before the fire that would change everything, Marcus Hale sat at his kitchen table staring at his coffee as it grew cold. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting familiar shadows across the worn oak surface his grandfather had built 60 years ago. Sarah moved quietly behind him, preparing Jake's lunch for school. The routine choreography of a marriage that had settled into comfortable predictability. At 41, Marcus carried himself with the measured confidence of a man who had spent 18 years running toward danger while others ran away. His shoulders bore the subtle forward curve of someone who had crawled through countless smoke-filled rooms, and his hands showed the permanent stains and small scars that marked a career in fire suppression. The badge pinned to his uniform shirt caught the morning light, scratched and dented from nearly 2 decades of service at Station 19. "You're quiet this morning," Sarah observed, glancing over her shoulder as she wrapped Jake's sandwich. Her voice carried the particular tone wives develop when they know something is bothering their husband, but aren't sure if they should probe. Marcus looked up from his coffee, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just thinking about the day ahead." "Same as every day," she said, not unkindly. Sarah had learned long ago that firefighters carried their thoughts differently than other men. They processed danger and responsibility in ways that didn't always translate into dinner conversation. Jake thundered down the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, already scrolling through his phone. At 16, he moved through the world with the casual confidence of youth, barely acknowledging his parents except when necessity required it. The boy had Marcus's dark hair and steady build, but Sarah's quick intelligence in his eyes. "Morning, Dad," Jake mumbled, grabbing his lunch without looking up from his screen. "Morning, son. Got that history test today?" "Yeah, it's fine." Jake's response held the dismissive tone teenagers reserve for parental concern. He paused at the door, finally, lifting his eyes from the phone. "Are you working tonight?" Marcus nodded. 24-hour shift. I'll see you tomorrow evening." Jake shrugged and disappeared through the front door, leaving behind the faint scent of the cologne he'd started wearing recently. Marcus watched through the window as his son climbed into Sarah's car, already absorbed again in whatever digital world commanded his attention. "He misses you," Sarah said softly, settling into the chair across from Marcus. "I'm here when I'm here." "But you're not really here, are you?" She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Even when you're home, it's like you're somewhere else." Marcus considered her words while studying their joined hands. Sarah's wedding ring had worn thin over 17 years, and he could see the small scar on her knuckle from when she'd cut herself gardening last spring. These details felt both intimate and distant, like examining artifacts from someone else's life. "I keep thinking there should be more," he said finally. "More what?" "Purpose, impact, something that matters beyond the next call." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You save lives, Marcus. That matters. Do I?" He pulled his hand away gently and stood, reaching for his gear bag. Most calls are false alarms or minor incidents. Cat stuck in a tree. Fender bender on Highway 12. When was the last time I actually saved someone? The question hung between them as Marcus shouldered his bag and kissed Sarah goodbye. She tasted like coffee and the faint sweetness of the lip balm she'd used since college. Familiar, comforting, but even that comfort felt like settling, like accepting something less than what life might offer. Station 19 occupied a red brick building that had housed firefighters for 43 years. The apparatus bay held 2 engines, 1 ladder truck, and a rescue vehicle that had seen better decades. Marcus's shift began with equipment checks, a ritual as ingrained as breathing. He tested hoses, verified air pack pressure, and inventoried medical supplies with the methodical precision of someone who understood that lives depended on details. Captain Rodriguez emerged from his office, carrying a steaming mug that proclaimed him world's most average dad. At 55, the captain had earned his position through competence rather than charisma, and his gray mustache had become something of a station landmark. Morning, Hale. How's the family? Good, Captain. Sarah's working on that garden project. Jake's got a history test. High school keeping him busy? Marcus nodded, though he realized he couldn't remember the last substantial conversation he'd had with his son. Jake seemed to navigate his teenage years with minimal parental input, which Marcus told himself was a sign of good raising, but secretly worried might indicate indifference. Tom Chun appeared from the kitchen, carrying a plate of scrambled eggs. That would serve as breakfast for whoever wanted to share. At 32, Tom brought an easy humor to the station that balanced Marcus's more serious nature. The two had worked together for 6 years, developing the kind of partnership that required few words during emergency calls. You look like someone stole your favorite parking spot, Tom observed, settling at the kitchen table. Just tired. Tired or thinking too much again. Tom had a way of cutting through surface conversations that Marcus both appreciated and found uncomfortable. Before Marcus could respond, the alarm bells rang out, followed by the dispatcher's voice crackling through the overhead speakers. Station 19, respond to 1247 Oak Street for a dog stuck in a drainage culvert. No human injuries reported. Tom grinned. See? Your morning's looking up already. Nothing like a good animal rescue to start the day. They climbed into engine 19, Marcus taking his usual position behind the wheel, while Tom checked their route on the tablet mounted to the dashboard. The call took them through neighborhoods Marcus had driven thousands of times, past houses where he'd responded to kitchen fires, medical emergencies, and the occasional cat-in-tree situation that constituted much of their routine work, the drainage. Culvert ran beneath Oak Street, carrying runoff from the residential area toward Mill Creek. A small crowd had gathered around the concrete opening, where a beagle had apparently chased something too far into the narrow space and gotten stuck. The dog's owner, a woman in her 70s with worry etched across her face, clutched a leash and explained how Buster had disappeared into the culvert an hour earlier. Marcus lay flat on his stomach and peered into the dark opening. The beagle whimpered from about 10 feet inside, clearly frightened but uninjured. Standard procedure involved patience, gentle coaxing, and sometimes a long pole with a loop to guide the animal to safety. "Hey there, boy," Marcus called softly into the culvert. "Let's get you back to your family." It took 20 minutes of careful work, but eventually Buster emerged, muddy and embarrassed but otherwise fine. The reunion between dog and owner carried the kind of genuine emotion that reminded Marcus why he'd chosen this profession. The woman hugged Buster close, tears streaming down her cheeks, thanking Marcus repeatedly for saving her baby. Driving back to the station, Tom glanced over at Marcus. "Feel better?" "About what?" "About making a difference. That lady's whole. World just got put back together because you crawled into a culvert and talked nice to a scared dog." Marcus considered this as they pulled into the station bay. Perhaps Tom was right. Perhaps the accumulated small kindnesses and minor rescues added up to something meaningful. But even as he tried to embrace that perspective, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something larger, something that would justify the pride he'd seen in his father's eyes all those years ago. The rest of the shift passed quietly. A medical call for chest pains turned out to be indigestion. A reported structure fire proved to be a neighbor burning leaves without checking wind conditions first. Routine calls that reinforced Marcus's sense of going through motions, rather than making meaningful impact. That evening, lying in his bunk at the station, Marcus stared at the ceiling and thought about his father. Michael Hale had died when Marcus was 12, killed in an apartment building fire while searching for trapped children. The funeral had been enormous, filled with firefighters from 6 departments and families whose lives Michael had touched. Marcus remembered the flag-draped casket, the bagpipes, and the overwhelming sense that his father had been someone who mattered in ways Marcus was only beginning to understand. 18 years into his own career, Marcus wondered if anyone would remember his service with the same reverence. He'd been competent, reliable, and safe. Exactly the kind of firefighter who built a solid career without making headlines. But competence felt insufficient when measured against legacy. Outside, a train whistle echoed through the night, carrying freight toward destinations Marcus would never see. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to know, with absolute certainty, that his life had mattered to someone else. That he had been, in some small way, essential to the world's continuation. 3 weeks later, at 247 Maple Street, Bailey would show him exactly what that felt like. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Marcus was reviewing inventory reports when the alarm bells shattered the station's afternoon quiet, followed by the dispatcher's urgent voice. Station 19. Structure fire at 247 Maple Street, Riverside neighborhood. Multiple units responding. Possible entrapment. Marcus's pulse quickened as he and Tom suited up in their gear. Structure fires with possible entrapment represented exactly the kind of call every firefighter both dreaded and lived for, the difference between routine service and life-or-death heroism. As they climbed into Engine 19, Marcus felt the familiar mix of adrenaline and focus that had carried him through 18 years of emergency response. The Riverside neighborhood consisted of modest 2-story homes built in the 1960s, with mature oak trees lining streets designed for a quieter era. Even from 6 blocks away, they could see the dark column of smoke rising above the tree line, black and thick in a way that suggested the fire had been burning longer than anyone realized. 247 Maple Street presented a scene of controlled chaos. 2 engines had already arrived, their crews deploying hoses while neighbors gathered on nearby lawns, some clutching pets or hastily grabbed belongings. The house, a white colonial with green shutters, showed flames visible through second-floor windows, with smoke pouring from the eaves. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio as Marcus and Tom approached the command post. Primary search complete on first floor, family accounted for. Need secondary sweep of upstairs before we can be certain the structure is clear. Marcus surveyed the scene while pulling on his air pack. The Weatherby family stood near an ambulance, parents clutching each other while paramedics checked their young son for smoke inhalation. Mr. Weatherby was speaking rapidly to a police officer, gesturing toward the house, his face streaked with soot and panic. I got upstairs, Marcus told Captain Rodriguez. Tom can coordinate water operations from here. Negative, Rodriguez replied. Fire's getting too hot up there. We'll wait for the ladder truck to set up for exterior operations. But Marcus was already studying the structure, calculating entry points and escape routes with the automatic assessment that came from years of experience. The front staircase remained viable, and the flames hadn't yet compromised the main load-bearing walls. A quick sweep would confirm the house was empty and allow them to focus purely on suppression. "Give me 10 minutes, Marcus said, adjusting his mask. "I can clear the second floor and be back down before conditions deteriorate." Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes, Hale. Radio check every 2 minutes. Marcus entered through the front door, immediately enveloped by the oppressive heat and smoke that transformed familiar domestic spaces into alien landscapes. The first floor showed heat damage, but remained structurally sound. Family photos lined the mantel above a brick fireplace, their glass already beginning to crack from the temperature. A child's backpack sat abandoned near the stairs, Superman logo barely visible through the gathering haze. The staircase creaked under his weight, but held firm as Marcus climbed toward the second floor. The temperature increased dramatically with each step, and his radio crackled with updates from the crews outside. "Interior team," they advised. "Fire is spreading faster than anticipated. Recommend expedited operations." The upstairs hallway stretched before him like a tunnel, with doors leading to what appeared to be 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. Marcus moved methodically, checking each room while calling out in case anyone remained hidden or unconscious. The master bedroom showed signs of hurried evacuation, dresser drawers pulled open, clothes scattered across the floor where someone had grabbed essentials before fleeing. The second bedroom appeared to be a teenage boy's space, with sports posters on the walls and video game controllers, abandoned on an unmade bed. Clear. The bathroom was empty, except for medicine bottles on the counter, and a child's rubber duck floating in the bathtub. Clear. Marcus was turning toward the final bedroom when he heard the ominous groan of stressed timber above his head. He looked up just as a section of ceiling beam, weakened by fire and loaded with the weight of accumulated water from suppression efforts, gave way with a sharp crack. The impact drove him to his knees, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending his helmet skittering across the floor. For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the sudden disorientation of being trapped beneath debris in a burning building. His radio had been knocked loose in the fall, and he could hear Captain Rodriguez's voice calling for status reports, but the device lay several feet away, beyond his immediate reach. Panic began to creep in as Marcus realized he was pinned beneath the beam, unable to stand but not completely immobilized. Smoke was getting thicker, and he could feel the heat intensifying as the fire spread closer to his location. He managed to shift position enough to begin crawling toward his radio, but the effort left him dizzy and nauseous. That's when he saw the golden retriever. The dog appeared through the smoke like an apparition, moving with purpose and calm that seemed impossible given the chaos surrounding them. Bailey, though Marcus didn't yet know her name, approached without fear, her golden coat dulled by smoke but her eyes bright and focused. She stopped directly in front of Marcus, tilted her head, and made a soft whining sound that somehow cut through the roar of the fire. Marcus blinked, certain the smoke and stress were causing hallucinations. Dogs didn't appear in burning buildings. Dogs ran from fire, not toward it. But Bailey nudged his shoulder with her nose, then stepped back and looked toward the hallway, clearly wanting him to follow. "Here, girl," Marcus called weakly, thinking the dog had somehow gotten lost in the confusion and needed guidance toward an exit. He pointed toward the staircase he'd used to reach the second floor. "That way. Go that way." But Bailey ignored his direction. Instead, she moved toward the final bedroom, the one Marcus hadn't yet checked, and looked back at him expectantly. When he didn't immediately follow, she returned and nudged him again, more insistently this time. Every instinct told Marcus to head for the stairs. His air supply was running low. The heat was becoming unbearable, and remaining on the second floor much longer would likely mean not leaving at all. But something in Bailey's demeanor, the way she kept looking toward that bedroom, The purposeful quality of her movements made him reconsider. Against all logic and training, Marcus began crawling toward the room Bailey indicated. Each movement sent pain shooting through his ribs where the beam had struck him, and his breathing was becoming labored behind the mask. Bailey stayed close, occasionally touching her nose to his shoulder as if offering encouragement. The bedroom door was partially closed, and Marcus had to push it open with his shoulder. The room beyond appeared to be a guest space, with a daybed against one wall and a small desk by the window. But as Marcus swept his flashlight across the space, the beam illuminated something that made his heart stop. In the far corner, curled beneath a small desk and nearly invisible in the thick smoke, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, unconscious but breathing, overcome by smoke inhalation. Her pink pajamas were singed at the edges, and her dark hair was matted with soot. Marcus later learned that Emma Weatherby had been visiting her aunt, who had brought her to the house for an afternoon playdate. In the chaos of evacuation, with smoke alarms blaring and adults shouting instructions, no one had realized the little girl had hidden in the guest room, too frightened to respond to calls. Without Bailey, Marcus would never have found her. He would have completed his sweep of the obvious rooms, reported the second floor clear, and left Emma to die alone in the smoke. Working quickly despite his injuries, Marcus scooped the unconscious child into his arms and began the treacherous journey back toward the staircase. Bailey led the way, somehow navigating through smoke so thick that Marcus could barely see his own hands. The dog seemed to know exactly where structural supports remained sound and which areas to avoid as the fire continued to weaken the building's integrity. They reached the staircase just as Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed through the building. All interior crews evacuate immediately. Structures compromised. The descent felt like it took hours, though Marcus's watch later showed it had been less than 3 minutes. Bailey stayed close, occasionally brushing against his legs as if to remind him of her presence. When they finally emerged through the front door, Marcus was met by paramedics who immediately took Emma from his arms and began emergency treatment. The little girl was unconscious but alive, her vital signs weak but stable. As the ambulance pulled away with Emma and her frantic parents, Marcus sat on the bumper of Engine 19, oxygen mask covering his face, trying to process what had just happened. "Where did the dog come from?" Captain Rodriguez asked, looking around for Bailey. Marcus turned to point toward the golden retriever, but she had vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared. None of the other firefighters had seen her. The neighbors, who had gathered to watch the fire suppression efforts, hadn't noticed the dog running loose. Bailey had simply disappeared, leaving behind only Marcus's certainty that she had saved not just Emma's life, but his own understanding of what it meant to be a hero. The local news crews arrived as the fire was being brought under control. By evening, the story had been picked up by regional outlets, and by the following morning, Marcus found himself at the center of a media narrative about the miracle dog of Maple Street. Reporters wanted details about Bailey's appearance, her behavior, her apparent ability to locate a trapped child that human searchers had missed. But Marcus couldn't explain what had happened any more than the reporters could. He knew only that a golden retriever had appeared when he needed her most, had guided him away from safety toward danger, and in doing so, had revealed a purpose he'd been searching for his entire career. 3 days later, Emma Weatherby opened her eyes in the hospital and asked for the angel dog who had saved her. Marcus promised he would find Bailey, though he had no idea where to begin looking. What he didn't know was that Bailey had been looking for him much longer than he'd been looking for her. The antiseptic smell of the hospital seemed to cling to Marcus's clothes, even after he'd gone home, showered, and changed into fresh clothing. 2 days had passed since the Maple Street fire, and he found himself returning to Riverside General each evening to check on Emma Weatherby's recovery. The doctor said she would make a full recovery, but Marcus needed to see for himself that the little girl he'd carried from that burning room was truly going to be okay. Emma's room was decorated with get well cards from her second-grade class, balloons in bright primary colors, and a small garden of stuffed animals that seemed to multiply with each visit. The 7-year-old had regained consciousness the previous morning, and while her voice remained hoarse from smoke inhalation, her spirit appeared undiminished by the ordeal. "Mr. Marcus," Emma called out as he appeared in the doorway. She was sitting up in bed, wearing hospital pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns, a coloring book spread across her lap. "I drew you a picture." Marcus approached the bed, accepting the piece of construction paper Emma held out to him. The drawing showed a golden dog with what appeared to be wings, rendered in the bold strokes and vivid colors that only children could deploy with such confidence. Above the dog, Emma had written Bailey the angel dog in careful block letters. "That's beautiful, Emma. Is this the dog you remember from the fire?" Emma nodded solemnly. She was golden like sunshine, and she wasn't scared at all. She looked at me with happy eyes before you came to get me. Marcus studied the drawing more carefully. Emma had given Bailey a collar with what looked like a medal or tag, and had drawn small hearts floating around the dog's head. The attention to detail suggested this wasn't just a child's imagination filling in gaps. Emma had clear memories of their golden rescuer. Mrs. Weatherby entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Marcus. "She's been talking about that dog nonstop since she woke up. The strangest thing is, Emma's always been terrified of dogs. She won't go near them usually, but she describes this one like they were old friends." "Did anyone in your family own a golden retriever?" Marcus asked. "No, we're not really pet people. And none of the neighbors have dogs that match Emma's description." Mrs. Weatherby settled into the chair beside her daughter's bed. "The fire chief said none of his people saw a dog at the scene. It's like she appeared just for you and Emma, then vanished." Marcus had spent considerable time thinking about exactly that mystery. He'd spoken with every firefighter who had been at the scene, every neighbor who had witnessed the evacuation, every police officer who had helped with crowd control. No one had seen a golden retriever before, during, or after the fire. Yet Emma's detailed description matched perfectly with Marcus's own memories of Bailey's appearance and behavior. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said, setting down her crayons, "are you going to find Bailey and tell her thank you?" The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. Over the past 2 days, finding Bailey had become something approaching an obsession. He'd driven through every neighborhood within 5 miles of Maple Street, looking for golden retrievers. He'd called animal shelters, posted on social media, and even placed a classified ad in the local newspaper. Nothing. "I'm trying, sweetheart. Do you remember anything else about her? Where she might have come from?" Emma considered this with the seriousness children brought to important questions. She smelled like cookies, and she had a collar with something shiny on it, and Emma paused, her young face scrunching with concentration. "She acted like she was looking for something special, and when she saw you, she got all happy and excited, like she found what she was looking for." That afternoon, Marcus drove back to the Riverside neighborhood with renewed purpose. Instead of simply looking for golden retrievers, he began knocking on doors, asking residents if they knew anyone in the area who owned such a dog. Most people were helpful, but couldn't provide any leads. A few had heard about the miracle dog story on the news and were curious to hear first-hand details from the firefighter involved. It was Mrs. Patterson, who lived 4 houses down from the Weatherby place, who finally provided the breakthrough Marcus needed. "Golden retriever?" she said, pausing as she watered the petunias in her front yard. "You might want to talk to Mrs. Chun over on Oak Street. She's got a beautiful golden that she walks past here most evenings. Sweetest dog you ever saw, and smart as a whip." Oak Street was only 3 blocks from Maple Street, an easy walk for an athletic dog. Marcus found the address and pulled into the driveway of a small, well-maintained ranch house with flower beds that suggested their owner took pride in gardening. Before he could reach the front door, he heard barking from the backyard, the deep, friendly bark of a large dog responding to visitors. Marcus followed a flagstone path around the side of the house and found himself looking at a golden retriever who was unmistakably the dog from the fire. Bailey stood near a wooden fence, tail wagging with such enthusiasm that her entire back end moved from side to side. When she saw Marcus, her barking stopped, replaced by a soft, whining sound of recognition and pleasure. "Bailey?" Marcus called, and the dog immediately came to the fence, pressing her nose through the slats to sniff his extended hand. "Can I help you?" Marcus turned to find an elderly Asian woman emerging from the house, moving slowly but with obvious dignity. She appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Hale with the fire department. I think your dog may have been involved in a rescue situation, a perturbation a few days ago." The woman's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something approaching understanding. "You're the firefighter from the Maple Street fire. I've been wondering when you might come looking for Bailey. Then you know what happened. I know Bailey disappeared for several hours that day, and when she came home, she smelled like smoke and seemed unusually tired. I also know she's been restless ever since, like she's waiting for something." The woman extended her hand. "I'm Helen Chun, by the way, and this is Bailey." Marcus shook Mrs. Chun's hand, noting the firm grip that suggested strength despite her apparent age. "Mrs. Chun, I don't understand how Bailey got to the fire, or how she knew to find me, or how she knew there was a child trapped in that room. But without her, that little girl would have died." Mrs. Chun studied Marcus with the kind of careful attention that made him feel like he was being evaluated for something important. After a long moment, she nodded toward 2 lawn chairs positioned under a large maple tree. "Why don't we sit down, Mr. Hale, and I'll tell you what I know about Bailey's background. I think you'll find it interesting." As they settled into the chairs, Bailey positioned herself between them, close enough to rest her head on Marcus's knee. The contact felt familiar and comforting, as if he and the dog had known each other far longer than the few minutes they'd spent together in a burning building. "Bailey came to me 2 years ago through a service dog organization," Mrs. Chun began. "She was originally trained for search and rescue work, but she, how did they put it, washed out of the program. Why? Too sensitive, they said. Bailey has an unusual ability to read human emotions and respond to distress, but the trainers felt she became too emotionally invested in the people she was supposed to help. They wanted a dog who could follow commands and maintain professional distance. Bailey wanted to fix everything that was wrong with the world." Marcus looked down at Bailey, who was gazing up at him with the same calm, intelligent expression he remembered from the fire. "So they gave her up? They placed her with me as a companion animal. My late husband was a firefighter. He worked with Station 12 for 32 years before he retired. After he passed away 5 years ago, I thought a dog might help with the loneliness." Mrs. Chun smiled and reached over to scratch Bailey's ears. "What I didn't expect was to end up with a dog who seemed to understand that her real job wasn't finished." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "What do you mean?" "Bailey has always been drawn to first responders. When we walk through the neighborhood, she pulls toward fire trucks, police cars, ambulances. She watches the local news with unusual attention, whenever there are stories about emergencies or rescues. And sometimes," Mrs. Chun paused, as if deciding whether to continue, "sometimes she'd disappear for a few hours, and when she comes back, she's clearly been somewhere important, somewhere she felt needed." The implications of what Mrs. Chun was suggesting began to settle in Marcus's mind. Are you saying Bailey seeks out emergency situations? I'm saying Bailey seeks out people who need help, and she's particularly drawn to those whose job it is to help others. I think she recognized something in you that day, Mr. Hale. Something that told her you were the right person to trust with, saving that little girl. Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, processing this information while Bailey remained contentedly pressed against his leg. The dog's presence felt like an anchor, grounding him in a moment that seemed to shift everything he thought. He understood about purpose, and calling Mrs. Chen disappeared into her house and returned, carrying a manila folder that looked like it had been handled frequently over the past 2 years. She settled back into her lawn chair and opened the folder carefully, revealing documents that appeared to be official certifications and training records. I thought you might want to see Bailey's background, she said, handing Marcus a laminated certificate. This is from the Midwest Search and Rescue Training Center. Bailey completed their full program: scent detection, wilderness tracking, disaster response, and urban search operations. Marcus studied the certificate, noting the impressive list of skills Bailey had mastered. According to the documentation, she had excelled in every aspect of training except what the evaluators termed emotional regulation. Multiple notes referenced Bailey's tendency to become overly invested in the welfare of both human partners and rescue subjects. These scores are incredible, Marcus said, flipping through additional pages of test results. She ranked in the top 5% of all dogs in the program. The trainer said she was one of the most naturally gifted dogs they'd ever worked, which Mrs. Chun agreed. But they also said she couldn't maintain the professional detachment necessary for reliable service. Bailey would refuse to leave victims even after they'd been handed off to medical personnel. She would pace and whine for hours after a successful rescue, as if she couldn't believe her job was truly finished. A photograph fell from the folder. Bailey, in a bright orange vest marked Search and Rescue, sitting alert beside a man in uniform. The dog looked younger, but her expression held the same intelligent intensity Marcus had seen in the burning house. What finally led to her retirement? Mrs. Chen hesitated, then pulled out what appeared to be an incident report. There was a training exercise involving a simulated building collapse. Bailey was supposed to locate the hidden victim, alert her handler, and then withdraw to allow rescue personnel to take over. Instead, she refused to leave the victim's side, even becoming aggressive toward the exercise controllers when they tried to remove her. Marcus read through the report, which described Bailey's behavior as problematic overprotectiveness and inability to distinguish between real emergencies and training scenarios. The final recommendation was clear. While Bailey possessed exceptional search abilities, her emotional responses made her unsuitable for professional deployment. So they placed her with you as a companion animal? My husband had volunteered with the organization for years after his retirement. When they told me about Bailey's situation, it seemed like we might be good for each other. Mrs. Chun took the certificate back from Marcus and returned it to the folder. What I didn't anticipate was how much she would miss working. Over the next hour, Mrs. Chun shared stories that painted a picture of a dog who had never quite accepted retirement. Bailey would alert to sirens from miles away, becoming restless and anxious until the emergency vehicles had passed. She showed unusual interest in television news reports about fires, accidents, or natural disasters. And occasionally, she would simply disappear for several hours, returning home tired but satisfied, as if she had fulfilled some important obligation. I started keeping a log, Mrs. Chun said, producing a small notebook from the folder, recording when Bailey would disappear and trying to correlate it with local emergency reports. The pattern became pretty clear after a few months. Marcus examined the notebook, which contained careful entries documenting Bailey's absences alongside newspaper clippings about local emergencies. The correlation was unmistakable. Bailey consistently vanished during significant incidents requiring emergency response, often returning before the events had been reported in the media. This is incredible. She's been conducting her own rescue operations? I think Bailey has been looking for opportunities to do what she was trained for, even without official authorization. And I think she's been waiting for the right partner to work with. The implications of what Mrs. Chun was suggesting began to reshape Marcus's understanding of what had happened at the Maple Street fire. Bailey hadn't stumbled upon the emergency by chance. She had deliberately sought it out. And she hadn't randomly selected Marcus as someone to help. She had identified him as someone capable of completing the rescue she had initiated. Mrs. Chun, would it be possible for me to spend some time with Bailey? To see if we can work together? The elderly woman studied Marcus with the same careful evaluation he'd noticed during their initial conversation. What did you have in mind? I don't know exactly. Maybe some basic training exercises, see how we communicate, whether she responds to direction. Marcus looked down at Bailey, who had remained calm and attentive throughout their conversation. I keep thinking about how she knew exactly what to do in that house, how she guided me to Emma without any formal commands or signals. There might be something we could develop. Mrs. Chun nodded slowly. Bailey's been restless since the fire, more so than usual. I think she knows she did something important, and she's waiting to do it again. They arranged for Marcus to visit the following evening after his shift. Mrs. Chun suggested bringing some basic equipment, a flashlight, maybe some treats for positive reinforcement, and anything Marcus might use during actual emergency calls. The idea was to see whether Bailey retained her professional skills and whether she could adapt them to work with Marcus specifically. That evening, Marcus called Sarah to explain why he would be late coming home from his shift. He found himself struggling to articulate exactly what he hoped to accomplish with Bailey, partly because he wasn't entirely sure himself. You want to train with a dog? Not just any dog. The dog that saved Emma Weatherby's life. Sarah, this animal has abilities I've never seen before. She knew things she couldn't have known, found someone no human searcher would have located. If I could learn to work with her, Marcus. Sarah's voice carried the patient tone she used when she thought he was getting carried away with an idea. You're talking about this dog like she's some kind of supernatural being. Dogs are smart, yes, but they're still just animals. Marcus understood Sarah's skepticism, but he also knew what he had experienced in that burning house. Bailey hadn't acted like just an animal. She had demonstrated judgment, initiative, and a level of purposeful behavior that went beyond training or instinct. I need to explore this, he said finally. I can't explain what happened at that fire, but I know it was important. Maybe the most important thing that's ever happened in my career. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. You've been different since that fire. More focused, but also more distant. Are you sure this is about the dog, or is it about something else? The question stayed with Marcus as he drove to Mrs. Chun's house the following evening. Was his fascination with Bailey really about her abilities, or was it about his own need to find meaning in work that had begun to feel routine? Perhaps both, he concluded. Bailey represented possibility, the chance to be part of something larger than standard. Fire suppression and medical response. Mrs. Chun had prepared for their training session by setting up a simple obstacle course. In her backyard, using lawn chairs, cardboard boxes, and pool noodles to create a basic search scenario. Bailey waited patiently as Mrs. Chun explained the setup. I've hidden treats in 3 different locations, she said, pointing to various spots around the yard. Bailey knows the game, but she's never played it with you giving the commands. Let's see how she responds to your direction. Marcus approached Bailey, who sat at attention with her tail wagging slowly. He had brought his department-issued flashlight and radio, thinking they might help establish a professional context for their interaction. Bailey, search, Marcus said. using the command he remembered from the search and rescue documentation. The response was immediate and impressive. Bailey rose smoothly and began systematically working her way across the yard, nose to the ground, following scent patterns invisible to human observation. Within minutes, she had located all 3 hidden treats, returning to Marcus after each discovery to wait for acknowledgement before continuing. "That's remarkable," Marcus said as Bailey completed the exercise. "She's working like she's been partnered with me for years." "Now try something more complex," Mrs. Chun suggested. She disappeared into her house and returned with a small piece of clothing, a child's sock. "Hide this somewhere Bailey can't see, then ask her to find it." Marcus took the sock and walked to the far corner of the yard, placing it beneath a small garden shed where it would be completely hidden from view. When he returned, Bailey was sitting exactly where he had left her, waiting for instruction. "Bailey, find," Marcus said, holding his hand toward the general area where he had hidden the sock. Bailey immediately began working her way toward the shed, pausing occasionally to test the air with her nose. The process took longer than the treat-finding exercise, nearly 10 minutes of careful searching, but eventually she located the sock and brought it back to Marcus, dropping it at his feet with obvious pride. The success of these simple exercises emboldened Marcus to suggest something more challenging. "Mrs. Chun, would it be possible to simulate a more realistic search scenario? Maybe using your house?" 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself conducting what amounted to a professional search and rescue training exercise in Mrs. Chun's living room. She had hidden a small stuffed animal in one of the bedrooms while Bailey remained outside, then asked Marcus to direct the search using only verbal commands. The results exceeded Marcus's most optimistic expectations. Bailey responded to his direction with precision and intelligence, systematically clearing each room before moving to the next. When she located the hidden object, she returned to Marcus and sat calmly, waiting for acknowledgement before delivering the item. "She's incredible," Marcus said as they concluded the session. "It's like working with a partner who anticipates what I need before I ask for it." Mrs. Chun smiled as she prepared treats for Bailey's reward. "I think you two have something special. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" That question followed Marcus home and kept him awake long into the night. What was he going to do with his newfound partnership with Bailey? The fire department had no formal program for working with civilian dogs. Captain Rodriguez would need convincing that such an arrangement served any legitimate purpose. And Sarah was already concerned about the amount of time and emotional energy Marcus was investing in what she saw as an unusual obsession. But Marcus also knew he couldn't simply return to routine firefighting and pretend his encounter with Bailey had never happened. The dog had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose and possibility that had been missing from his work for years. Whatever came next, Marcus was certain that Bailey would be part of it. 3 days later, he began keeping his own log, documenting Bailey's behavior and their training progress. Within a week, the pattern Mrs. Chun had described became evident. Bailey would become restless and anxious in the hours before significant emergency calls came in, as if she sensed trouble developing before human awareness could detect it. Marcus began to wonder if Bailey's sensitivity to human distress might extend beyond the immediate present. Could she somehow detect emergencies before they fully developed? The possibility seemed far-fetched, but then again, everything about Bailey challenged conventional understanding of what dogs could accomplish. What Marcus didn't yet realize was that Bailey's abilities, remarkable as they seemed, were only part of a much larger picture he was just beginning to see. The cardboard box had been sitting in Marcus's bedroom closet for 5 years, pushed behind winter coats and forgotten until Sarah mentioned she was planning to reorganize their storage spaces. When Marcus pulled it down from the shelf, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through their bedroom window. and the smell of old paper and memories filled the air. Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, were the remnants of his father's firefighting career. Marcus had packed these items away after his mother's funeral, unable to look at them but unwilling to discard what remained of Michael Hale's legacy. Now, as he carefully unwrapped each piece, Marcus felt the weight of 18 years of questions he had never been able to answer. His father's helmet came first, the classic leather design that predated modern safety equipment. The surface was scarred and blackened from countless fires, and the brass number 7 was barely visible beneath layers of soot that no amount of cleaning had ever fully removed. Marcus turned the helmet over in his hands, trying to imagine the weight it must have carried on his father's head. During those final moments in the apartment building fire, next was a medal, the Medal of Valor, presented posthumously to Michael Hale for his actions in saving 3 children from the riverside. Apartments before the building's collapse claimed his life. Marcus had been 12 years old when Captain Morrison had presented the medal to his mother, explaining how Michael had made multiple trips into the burning structure to locate and evacuate trapped residents, refusing to leave until he was certain everyone was safe. The medal was heavier than Marcus remembered. Solid brass with an engraved flame symbol and his father's name etched in precise block letters. For nearly 3 decades, Marcus had wondered if he would ever do anything worthy of such recognition, or if he was destined to be remembered as simply competent, reliable, but never heroic. Beneath the medal was a photograph Marcus hadn't seen in years, his father in full gear, standing beside Engine 7 with 3 other firefighters. Michael Hale had been a large man, broad-shouldered and confident, with the kind of presence that made others feel safer simply by being near him. In the photograph, he was smiling at something outside the camera's range, and Marcus could almost hear the deep laugh that had filled their house during those 2 brief years of childhood. Finding treasures? Marcus looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee and studying the items spread across their bed. Her expression was soft, understanding. She knew the significance of what he was doing. "I haven't looked at this stuff since Mom died," Marcus said, carefully, setting the photograph aside. "I couldn't handle it then." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the medal, turning it over to read the inscription on the back. "For conspicuous bravery in the face of mortal danger and unwavering devotion to the preservation of human life." She looked up at Marcus with tears forming in her eyes. "He would be so proud of what you did at the Maple Street fire, would he?" Marcus took the medal from Sarah and studied it again. Dad saved 3 children and died doing it. Everyone said he was a hero, that he represented the best of what firefighters could be. "I saved 1 little girl, and only because a dog showed me where to find her." "Marcus, that's not. I've been doing this job for 18 years, and I've never come close to the kind of impact Dad made in one day. I respond to calls, follow protocols, go home safe. That's not heroism, it's just competence." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with the kind of careful attention that meant she was choosing her words precisely. "Do you remember what Jake asked you last month about his grandfather?" Marcus frowned, trying to recall the conversation Sarah was referencing. He wanted to know if Grandpa Michael was really as brave as everyone said, or if the stories had gotten bigger over the years. "Do you remember what you told him?" The memory came back clearly. Jake had been working on a school project about family history, and he'd asked pointed questions about the grandfather he'd never met. Marcus had explained that heroism wasn't about single dramatic gestures. It was about consistently choosing to put others' welfare ahead of your own safety, day after day, year after year. I told him that Dad's Medal of Valor represented one moment, but that it was possible because of thousands of smaller moments when Dad chose service over self-interest. "And that's exactly what you've been doing for 18 years, Sarah said. "Every time you walk into a burning building, Every time you respond to a medical emergency at 3 in the morning, every time you risk your safety to help strangers, you're choosing service over self-interest. Marcus wanted to accept Sarah's perspective, but something in him resisted the comparison. His father had died saving children, had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to others. Marcus had built a solid career, but he had never been tested in the way that revealed true character. "Maybe," he said, returning the medal to its tissue paper wrapping, "but I keep feeling like I'm waiting for something. Some moment when I'll know I've made a real difference." Like what happened with Bailey and Emma. The mention of Bailey's name brought Marcus's attention into sharp focus. Over the past 2 weeks, he had spent nearly every evening at Mrs. Chun's house, working with Bailey on increasingly complex search and rescue exercises. The dog's abilities continued to amaze him, but more importantly, working with Bailey had rekindled something in Marcus that he had thought was permanently extinguished. Sense of excitement about his profession. "Bailey changes everything," Marcus said. "When I'm working with her, I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. Not just responding to emergencies, but actually making a difference in ways that matter." Sarah's expression shifted subtly, and Marcus recognized the look that meant she was about to express a concern she'd been holding back. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Okay, are you falling in love with Bailey because of what she can do, or are you falling in love with the idea of being someone special?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He started to offer an immediate denial, but Sarah held up her hand. "I'm not criticizing you. I'm just worried that you're putting so much pressure on this relationship with Bailey to solve something that might not be solvable that way." Marcus considered Sarah's words as he continued unpacking his father's belongings. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in an old newspaper, he found something he had forgotten existed, a small notebook in his father's handwriting. The pages contained what appeared to be personal reflections on various emergency calls, observations about the psychological challenges of firefighting, and thoughts about balancing professional obligations with family responsibilities. One entry, dated just 3 months before his father's death, caught Marcus's attention. Responded to house. Fire on Elm Street today. Family of 4 evacuated safely. No injuries. Property damage minimal. Standard call. Routine suppression. Nothing heroic required. But driving home, I kept thinking about the look in the mother's eyes when she realized her children were safe. That's the real reward of this job. Not the dramatic rescues that make headlines, but the quiet moments when you help preserve what matters most to people. Michael Jr. asked me yesterday what makes someone brave. I told him bravery is showing up consistently for people who need help, even when no one is watching and no one will remember your name. Marcus read the passage twice, then showed it to Sarah. His father had understood something that Marcus was only beginning to grasp. That heroism wasn't about seeking opportunities for dramatic gestures, but about finding meaning in consistent service to others. "Maybe I've been looking for the wrong thing," Marcus admitted. "Maybe I've been so focused on proving I'm worthy of Dad's legacy that I've missed the point of what that legacy actually represents." Sarah leaned over and kissed his forehead. Gently. "Your father would be proud of the man you've become, Marcus. Not because you saved Emma Weatherby, but because you've spent 18 years showing up for people who need help." That evening, Marcus drove to Mrs. Chun's house with his father's notebook tucked into his jacket pocket. Bailey greeted him with her usual enthusiasm, but Marcus noticed she seemed more subdued than usual, as if she sensed he was carrying something heavy. They worked through their standard training exercises, but Marcus found his attention drifting to questions about purpose and legacy. When they finished, he and Mrs. Chun sat in their usual chairs under the maple tree, Bailey positioned between them. "Mrs. Chun, can I ask you something about your husband's career?" "Of course." "Did he ever struggle with feeling like his work didn't matter enough?" like he should be doing something more dramatic or heroic. Mrs. Chun smiled, and Marcus could see decades of understanding in her expression. Every firefighter I've ever known has wrestled with that question. My husband used to say that the hardest part of the job wasn't running into burning buildings. It was accepting that most of the good you do happens quietly, without recognition or fanfare. How did he make peace with that? He kept a journal for the last 10 years of his career. Every day, he would write down one thing he had done that day to help someone else, no matter how small. A kind word to a frightened accident victim. Taking extra time to explain fire safety to a child. Staying late to help a colleague with paperwork. By the end, he had documented thousands of small acts of service that added up to a lifetime of meaningful work. Marcus pulled his father's notebook from his pocket and showed Mrs. Chun the passage about finding meaning in routine calls. As she read, Bailey shifted position to rest her head more fully on Marcus's knee, as if offering comfort for burdens he was only beginning to acknowledge. The newspaper clipping was yellowed and brittle, discovered tucked between the pages of his father's journal like a pressed flower. Marcus handled it carefully as he spread it across Mrs. Chun's kitchen table. The headline still bold, despite decades of fading. Firefighter dies hero's death, saving 3 children from apartment blaze. Below the headline was a photograph Marcus had never seen before, his father carrying a young boy from the Riverside apartments, smoke billowing behind them, both figures silhouetted against the orange glow of flames. The image captured something Marcus remembered but had never been able to articulate: the expression of calm determination his father wore when lives depended on his actions. The article described the sequence of events that led to Marcus Hale's death with the clinical precision of newspaper reporting. But reading it as an adult, Marcus noticed details that had escaped his 12-year-old understanding. His father had made 4 separate trips into the burning building. The first 3 had been successful rescues: 2 children and an elderly woman who had been trapped on the 2nd floor. The 4th trip, undertaken after other firefighters had deemed the structure too dangerous to enter, had been his last. He didn't have to go back in, Marcus said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Mrs. Chun or to himself. Mrs. Chun looked up from where she was preparing tea at the kitchen counter. What do you mean? The article says the building was already compromised when Dad made his final entry. The other firefighters had established a perimeter and were preparing for defensive operations. He chose to go back in. Does that surprise you? Marcus considered the question as he continued reading. The article quoted Captain Morrison, his father's supervisor, explaining that Marcus Hale had insisted there might be additional victims in the building's rear apartments. Other firefighters had argued that the risk was too great, but Marcus had responded that uncertainty about potential victims was exactly the reason someone needed to search. No, Marcus said finally. It doesn't surprise me. That's exactly what Dad would have done. What did surprise Marcus was discovering his own reaction to the article. For nearly 30 years, he had carried the weight of his father's heroic death as a challenge he might never meet, a standard of courage and sacrifice that seemed impossibly high. But reading the newspaper account with adult understanding, Marcus began to see his father's final decision differently. Marcus Hale hadn't died because he was recklessly brave or desperate to be remembered as a hero. He had died because his commitment to protecting others made it impossible for him to accept the possibility that someone might need help and not receive it. The 4th trip into the burning building hadn't been about heroism. It had been about refusing to let uncertainty become an excuse for inaction. Mrs. Chun, do you think some people are just born with more courage than others? The elderly woman joined Marcus at the table, setting down 2 cups of tea and settling into her chair with the careful movements of someone who had learned to respect her aging joints. I think courage isn't something you're born with or without, she said. I think it's something you practice, like playing piano or speaking a foreign language. The more you choose to act despite your fear, the easier it becomes to make that choice the next time. Marcus sipped his tea and thought about his own career. 18 years of responding to emergency calls, of walking into dangerous situations because the job required it. Had he been practicing courage without realizing it? Or had he simply been following protocols and hoping for the best? "Bailey has courage," he said, looking toward the back door where the golden retriever was visible through the glass, lying contentedly in a patch of afternoon sunlight. "Bailey has something more than courage," Mrs. Chun replied. "She has certainty. When she decides someone needs help, there's no hesitation, no second-guessing. She simply acts." Over the past 3 weeks, Marcus had begun taking Bailey on unofficial visits to emergency scenes. Nothing dramatic or dangerous, just opportunities for the dog to observe professional rescue operations and for Marcus to study how she responded to different types of situations. The results had been consistently remarkable. At a car accident on Highway 12, Bailey had ignored the obvious victims, who were already receiving medical attention, and had instead focused on a passenger who appeared uninjured but was showing early signs of shock. At a house fire on Cedar Street, she had alerted to a section of the building that firefighters hadn't yet searched, leading to the discovery of an elderly man's cat hiding in a basement storage room. Most significantly, Bailey seemed to possess an uncanny ability to identify emergency responders who were struggling with stress, doubt, or emotional fatigue. She would position herself near these individuals, offering the kind of calm presence that seemed to restore their focus and confidence. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Bailey being too emotionally invested to work professionally," Marcus said. "What if that's exactly what makes her valuable?" Mrs. Chun raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Traditional search and rescue dogs are trained to follow commands and maintain emotional distance from victims. But Bailey doesn't just follow commands. She evaluates situations and makes independent decisions about what kind of help is needed. She doesn't just locate people in distress. She provides emotional support to both victims and rescuers." "That's an interesting perspective. What are you thinking of doing with it?" Marcus had been wrestling with exactly that question for days. His informal training sessions with Bailey had demonstrated that they could work together effectively, but the fire department had no official framework for incorporating civilian dogs into emergency operations. Captain Rodriguez had been politely skeptical when Marcus had mentioned his work with Bailey, suggesting that any formal proposal would need to demonstrate clear operational benefits. "I want to document what Bailey can do," Marcus said. "Create a record of her abilities and how they might enhance emergency response. Maybe develop a training protocol that other departments could use." Mrs. Chun nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a worthwhile project. But can I ask you something?" "Sure. What happens if your department isn't interested? What happens if they decide Bailey's abilities don't fit their operational needs?" The question forced Marcus to confront something he had been avoiding. His growing partnership with Bailey had become the most meaningful aspect of his professional life, but it existed entirely outside official channels. If the fire department rejected his proposal, he would face a choice between his career and his relationship with Bailey. "I don't know," he admitted. "I suppose I'd have to figure out another way to work with her. Or you'd have to accept that some of the most important work we do happens outside official recognition." That evening, Marcus drove home with Mrs. Chun's words echoing in his mind. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he arrived, and Jake was at the dining room table working on homework with an expression that suggested math was not cooperating with his efforts. "How was your session with Bailey?" Sarah asked, glancing up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Good. We worked on some new scenarios." Marcus paused, then decided to share what had been occupying his thoughts. "Sarah, what would you think if I told you I was considering making some changes to my career?" Sarah set down her knife and turned. To face him fully. What kind of changes? I don't know exactly. Maybe something that would let me work with Bailey more formally. Maybe training other firefighters to work with therapy animals, or developing new approaches to emergency response. That sounds like it could be exciting, but also like it might be a big risk. Jake looked up from his math homework, apparently, interested in a conversation that didn't involve algebraic equations. Dad, are you talking about the dog that saved that little girl? Marcus nodded. Bailey. I've been working with her, learning about her abilities. That's cool. Can I meet her sometime? The request surprised Marcus. Jake rarely expressed interest in his father's work, and Marcus had assumed his son was too absorbed in teenage concerns to care about emergency response or animal training. Would you like to come with me tomorrow evening? Mrs. Chun wouldn't mind, and Bailey would probably enjoy meeting you. Yeah, that would be awesome. Sarah smiled at the interaction between father and son. Jake's been asking questions about your work since the fire. I think he's starting to understand what you do for a living. Later that night, after Jake had finished his homework and gone to bed, Marcus sat at his desk and began writing. If he was going to propose integrating Bailey into emergency operations, he needed to document everything he had learned about her abilities and their potential applications. The writing came easily, flowing from weeks of observation and analysis. Marcus described Bailey's search and rescue background, her unusual sensitivity to human distress, and her ability to make independent decisions about when and how to provide assistance. He outlined specific scenarios where his skills could enhance traditional emergency response, and he proposed a trial program that would allow the department to evaluate her effectiveness without making long-term commitments. By midnight, Marcus had produced a 15-page proposal that represented the most important document of his professional career. As he saved the file and prepared for bed, he realized that writing the proposal had clarified something crucial: whether or not the fire department accepted his ideas. His work with Bailey had already transformed his understanding of what it had meant to serve others. The next evening, Jake met Bailey for the first time, and Marcus watched his son's face light up with the same wonder he had felt during that first encounter in Mrs. Chun's backyard. Bailey seemed to recognize Jake's youth and adjusted her energy accordingly, playing gently and responding to his tentative attempts at giving commands. She's incredible, Dad, Jake said as they drove home. It's like she knows exactly what you're thinking. She's taught me a lot about paying attention, Marcus replied. About noticing things I might have missed before. Like what? Marcus thought about how to explain Bailey's gifts to a 16-year-old. Like the fact that helping people isn't just about solving their immediate problems. Sometimes it's about understanding what they need emotionally, not just physically. Jake nodded as if this made perfect sense. So Bailey doesn't just find people who are lost. She finds people who need someone to care about them. Marcus glanced at his son with new appreciation. Jake had grasped something about Bailey's nature that had taken Marcus weeks to understand. Perhaps his son was more perceptive than Marcus had given him credit for. Exactly, Marcus said. And maybe that's something I can learn to do better too. The call came at 6:30 on a Thursday morning. Mrs. Chun had collapsed while walking Bailey and was being transported to Riverside General. Marcus threw on clothes and drove to the hospital, arriving to find Bailey sitting calmly in the waiting room beside Tom Chun, who had been contacted as Mrs. Chun's emergency contact and only local family member. How is she? Marcus asked, settling into a chair beside Tom. Stable, but they're keeping her for observation. Looks like it might have been a minor heart episode. Tom glanced down at Bailey, who had positioned herself between the two men with typical precision. She asked me to make sure Bailey was taken care of while she's here. Marcus nodded. Of course, Bailey can stay with us as long as needed. Over the next 3 days, while Mrs. Chun underwent cardiac testing and treatment, Marcus found himself caring for Bailey full-time. The arrangement gave him unprecedented opportunity to observe her behavior in different settings. And what he discovered both amazed and puzzled him. Bailey seemed to know exactly when emergency calls would come in, often becoming restless and moving toward the door several minutes before Marcus's radio or phone would sound. She demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense his emotional state, providing comfort when he was stressed and maintaining respectful distance when he needed space to think. Most remarkably, she appeared to understand the difference between genuine emergencies and routine calls, showing intense focus for serious incidents while remaining calm for minor situations. On Saturday morning, while Bailey slept contentedly on the Hale family's living room rug, Marcus received permission to visit Mrs. Chen in her hospital room. She looked frail against the white sheets, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "How is Bailey adjusting to staying with your family?" she asked. "She's incredible. It's like having a partner who anticipates my needs before I recognize them myself." Marcus pulled a chair close to her bedside. "Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you something. How long have you known about my father?" The question clearly surprised her, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression, a recognition that a conversation she had been avoiding was now inevitable. "What do you mean?" Bailey's response to me was too immediate, too specific. "And some of the things you've said about her background, about her placement with you, it feels like there's more to the story." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with the same careful evaluation he had noticed during their first meeting. Finally, she sighed and reached for the water cup on her bedside table. "My husband worked with your father at Station 12 for 6 years. They were partners on Engine 12 until your father transferred to Station 19. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You knew my father personally?" "David and Michael were close friends. When your father died, David was one of the firefighters who responded to the scene. He was there when—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was there when they recovered Michael's body." The room seemed to shrink around Marcus as the implications of what Mrs. Chen was revealing began to register. "You've known who?" "I was from the beginning. David never got over losing Michael. They had planned to retire together, to travel with their wives and enjoy their grandchildren. When Michael died, David felt like he had lost a brother." Mrs. Chen's voice grew softer. "After David's own retirement, he became convinced that firefighters needed better support systems. Not just professional counseling, but emotional support that could help them process the psychological challenges of the job." Marcus stared at Mrs. Chen, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed beginning to fall into place. "What kind of support?" David started working with a network of retired first responders and animal therapy specialists. They identified firefighters, police officers, and paramedics who were struggling with stress, doubt, or career burnout. Then they would arrange for therapy animals to be placed strategically in their lives. The coldness in Marcus's stomach was spreading, accompanied by a growing sense of betrayal. "Are you telling me that Bailey was placed with you specifically because of me?" "David moved us to Oak Street after he learned you had been assigned to Station 19. He wanted to be close enough to observe how you were handling your career, to see if you might benefit from the kind of support Bailey could provide." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. Below, he could see emergency vehicles coming and going, the constant flow of crisis and response that had defined his professional life. Everything he thought he understood about his relationship with Bailey was being reframed in ways that made him question his own judgment. So when Bailey appeared at the Maple Street fire, that wasn't chance or instinct. That was part of some kind of intervention you had planned. "No." Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. "Marcus, you have to understand, Bailey's response to emergency situations is entirely her own. David and I placed her in the neighborhood because we thought she might be helpful to you. but we never expected her to seek out active fire scenes. What happened at the Maple Street fire was Bailey's decision, not ours." Marcus turned back toward the bed, studying Mrs. Chun's face for signs of deception. "How long has this network been operating?" 15 years. We've helped place therapy animals with first responders in 6 different states. Most of the people we've assisted never realized the arrangement was intentional. They just think they got lucky finding the right pet at the right time. And my assignment to certain emergency calls, my work schedule, was any of that manipulated? Mrs. Chun hesitated, and Marcus knew he wasn't going to like her answer. David had friends in dispatch and administration. Nothing dramatic, nothing that compromised public safety. But yes, sometimes your assignments were influenced to put you in situations where Bailey might be most helpful. The betrayal felt complete. Marcus sat down heavily, trying to process the revelation that his most meaningful professional experiences had been orchestrated by people who thought he needed management and intervention. Double quotes, Mrs. Chun. "Do you understand what you're telling me? You're saying that my relationship with Bailey, the work we've been doing together, the sense of purpose I've rediscovered, all of that was built on deception." "No, Marcus. That's not what I'm saying at all." Mrs. Chun struggled to sit up straighter in her hospital bed. "David and I provided the opportunity for you and Bailey to meet. But everything that happened after that, your bond with her, your training together, your growing confidence as a firefighter, that was real. That was you discovering abilities and qualities you already possessed." Marcus wanted to accept her explanation, but the sense of manipulation was overwhelming. How could he trust his own feelings about Bailey when their entire relationship had been engineered by people who saw him as a problem to be solved? "I need to see the records," he said. "Finally, I need to understand exactly what you and your husband did, how many people were involved, what other aspects of my career have been influenced." Mrs. Chun nodded slowly. "There's a box in my bedroom closet. David's journal, correspondence with other network members, case files for all the first responders we've worked with. You're welcome to examine everything." Marcus left the hospital feeling like the ground beneath his feet had shifted in ways that might never stabilize. The drive to Mrs. Chun's house passed in a blur of anger, confusion, and something approaching. Grief for the loss of what he had thought was a genuine partnership with Bailey. Tom met him at Mrs. Chun's front door, having agreed to provide access to his aunt's house while she remained hospitalized. He seemed to sense Marcus's emotional state and offered only minimal conversation as they made their way to Mrs. Chun's bedroom. The closet contained exactly what Mrs. Chun had described, a large box filled with documents that told the story of an elaborate support network designed to help struggling first responders. David Chun's journal contained detailed observations about Marcus's career, his apparent dissatisfaction with routine assignments, and his potential to benefit from working with a therapy animal. But the journal also contained something Marcus hadn't expected: entries describing David's own struggle with survivor's guilt after Michael Hale's death, and his determination to honor his lost friend's memory by protecting Michael's son from similar psychological challenges. One entry, dated just 2 months before David's own death, stood out. "Watched Marcus respond to the apartment fire on Cider Street today. Competent, professional, but I can see the same restlessness in him that consumed his father in those final months. Michael always felt like he wasn't doing enough, wasn't making a sufficient difference. That restlessness led him to take unnecessary risks, to make that 4th trip into the Riverside apartments. I won't let Michael's son follow the same path. Bailey is our best hope for helping Marcus find peace with meaningful service that doesn't require martyrdom." Marcus read the passage twice, then set the journal aside and began examining the other documents in the box. What he found was a meticulously organized operation involving retired firefighters, animal behaviorists, therapy dog trainers, and even administrative personnel who could influence duty assignments and call dispatching. The scope of the network was staggering. Over 15 years, they had successfully placed therapy animals with more than 40 first responders across 6 states. The files contained follow-up reports tracking improved job satisfaction, reduced stress-related medical issues, and decreased early retirement rates. Among participants, Marcus's own file was thick with observations dating back nearly 10 years. David Chun had been watching him long before Mrs. Chun moved to Oak Street, documenting signs of career dissatisfaction and emotional isolation that Marcus himself had barely recognized. But the file also contained something that surprised him detailed. Records of Marcus's professional achievements, including commendations he had forgotten receiving and positive evaluations from supervisors who had recognized his steady competence and dedication. David Chun hadn't seen Marcus as a failure or a disappointment. He had seen him as someone with unrealized potential who needed the right kind of support to flourish. "This is incredible," Tom said, looking over Marcus's shoulder at a training manual for therapy animal placement. "I had no idea Uncle David was involved in anything like this." "Did you know about Bailey's background?" Tom shook his head. "I knew she was a retired service dog, and I knew Aunt Helen was devoted to her, but I thought it was just a normal pet adoption situation." Marcus continued reading, discovering that Bailey's placement had been the culmination of 2 years of careful planning. Her original search and rescue training had been supplemented with specialized therapy work, designed to help her recognize and respond to the specific psychological needs of emergency responders. The records showed that Bailey had been monitored closely during her first year with Mrs. Chun, with regular reports documenting her adjustment to civilian life and her growing sensitivity to Marcus's presence in the neighborhood. The trainers had been particularly interested in her spontaneous responses to emergency sirens and her apparent ability to predict when Marcus was experiencing work-related stress. But nowhere in the files could Marcus find evidence that Bailey's actions at the Maple Street fire had been planned or directed. The network's records ended abruptly on the day of the fire, replaced by a single note in Mrs. Chun's handwriting. "Bailey has found her purpose. No further intervention required." "Tom, what do you make of this?" Tom finished reading the page he had been examining and looked up at Marcus. "It sounds like my uncle and his friends created an opportunity for you to meet Bailey, but everything that happened after that was between you and her." Marcus wanted to accept that interpretation, but the sense of manipulation remained strong. How could he separate what was genuine from what had been engineered? How could he trust his own feelings about Bailey when their entire relationship existed within the framework of someone else's design? As he continued through the documents, Marcus found letters from other first responders who had been helped by the network. Their stories were remarkably similar to his own experienced professionals who had lost their sense of purpose, who had found meaning through relationships with specially trained animals, who had rediscovered joy in work they had begun to see as routine. But unlike Marcus, most of these people had never learned about the network's involvement in their lives. They believed their relationships with their therapy animals had developed naturally, through chance encounters and mutual attraction. One letter from a police officer in Colorado particularly resonated with Marcus. "I don't know how Kaiser found me, but I'm grateful every day that he did. Working with him has reminded me why I became a cop in the first place, not to enforce laws or make arrests, but to help people feel safe and protected. Kaiser doesn't care about my arrest statistics or my case clearance rate. He just wants to help people who are hurting, and working with him has taught me to see my job the same way." Marcus set the letter aside and looked around Mrs. Chun's bedroom, trying to process everything he had learned. The network had identified him as someone who needed help, had engineered circumstances to provide that help, and had monitored his progress without his knowledge or consent. By any reasonable standard, he should feel violated and manipulated. But he also couldn't deny that working with Bailey had transformed his relationship with his career in ways that felt entirely authentic. The confidence he had gained, the sense of purpose he had rediscovered, the joy he felt when working with Bailey on search and rescue exercise. Those emotions and experiences felt real, regardless of how the opportunity had been created. "What are you going to do?" Tom asked. Marcus looked at his friend and realized he didn't have a clear answer. Part of him wanted to reject everything connected to the network, to prove that he could find meaning and purpose without outside intervention. But another part of him recognized that the help he had received, however it had been provided, had been genuinely beneficial. "I don't know," Marcus said finally. "I need to think about what this means for my relationship with Bailey, for the work we've been doing together. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you're working with Bailey, when you're training together or responding to emergencies, how does it feel?" Marcus considered the question. "It feels like the most natural thing in the world, like we were meant to work together." "Then maybe that's what matters. Maybe the circumstances that brought you together are less important than what you've built together." That evening, Marcus sat in his backyard with Bailey lying contentedly at his feet, watching the sun set behind the oak trees that bordered his property. Sarah had gone to visit her sister, and Jake was at a friend's house, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the dog who had become the center of his professional transformation. Bailey seemed to sense his emotional turmoil, occasionally lifting her head to study his face with the kind of concerned attention that had become familiar over the past month. Her presence was comforting, but Marcus found himself questioning even that comfort. Was Bailey's response to his emotional state genuine, or was it the result of specialized training designed to manipulate his feelings? As darkness settled over the neighborhood, Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. Tomorrow, he would return to Mrs. Chun's house and study every document in David Chun's files. He would understand exactly how the network had operated, what role they had played in his career, and how extensively his professional life had been influenced by their interventions. But he would also continue working with Bailey, because regardless of how their partnership had begun, what they had built together felt too valuable to abandon. The network might have created the opportunity for them to meet, but they had created their working relationship through their own choices and efforts. Marcus looked down at Bailey, who was watching him with the patient attention that characterized all their interactions. "Whatever happens next, girl, we'll figure it out together." Bailey's tail thumped against the ground once, as if she understood and approved of his decision. For the first time since leaving the hospital that morning, Marcus felt like he might be able to find his way forward. The emergency alert came through at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had been unseasonably warm for October. Marcus was at Mrs. Chun's house, having just finished reading through the last of David Chun's files, when every emergency radio in the city began broadcasting the same urgent message. All units respond to Riverside Manor Apartments, 1500 Elm Street. Structure fire with multiple entrapments. This is a working fire with civilian casualties confirmed. Bailey's response was immediate and dramatic. The golden retriever, who had been lying peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, suddenly rose to her feet with her ears forward and her entire body radiating alertness. She moved to the front door and began a low, urgent whining that Marcus had never heard before. "Bailey, what is it?" But even as he asked the question, Marcus's own radio crackled to life with Captain Rodriguez's voice. "All Station 19 personnel respond immediately to Riverside Manor. This is the big one, people. Multiple engine companies already on scene requesting additional resources." Marcus looked at Bailey, who was now pawing at the front door with increasing urgency. For a moment, he hesitated. Everything he had learned about the network that had orchestrated their meeting made him question his instincts about working with Bailey. Was her behavior genuine, or was it the result of specialized training designed to make her seem more capable than she actually was? But as he watched Bailey's obvious distress, Marcus realized that his questions about their origins didn't matter in the face of an emergency where people needed help. Whatever had brought them together, they had developed genuine skills working as a team. If Bailey believed she could contribute to this rescue operation, Marcus owed it to the potential victims to trust her judgment. "Okay, girl, let's go." The drive to Riverside Manor took 12 minutes through heavy traffic, with Bailey riding in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck. Her attention focused entirely on the growing column of black smoke visible above the city's skyline. Marcus used the time to contact Captain Rodriguez by radio, explaining that he was responding with Bailey and requesting permission to deploy her if circumstances warranted. "Negative, Hale," came Rodriguez's immediate response. "This is a major incident with multiple agencies involved. I can't have civilian animals complicating operations." Marcus understood the captain's position, but he also knew that Bailey's abilities might prove essential if people were trapped in areas human searchers couldn't access quickly. "Copy that, Captain. Bailey and I will remain available if needed." "Bye." The time they arrived at Riverside Manor, the scene had evolved into the kind of coordinated chaos that characterized major emergency operations. The apartment complex consisted of 4 three-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with the northernmost structure fully engulfed in flames and heavy smoke pouring from windows throughout. The complex Marcus parked his truck in the staging area designated for off-duty personnel and surveyed the operation. 6 engine companies were attacking the fire from multiple angles, while ladder trucks positioned themselves for rescue operations. Ambulances lined Elm Street, their crews treating a steady stream of evacuated residents for smoke inhalation and minor injuries. But even from a distance, Marcus could see that the incident was overwhelming the resources currently deployed. The fire had spread faster than anyone had anticipated, and the complex's elderly population meant that many residents needed assistance, evacuating even when escape routes remained viable. Bailey jumped down from the truck and immediately began working her way toward the command post, where Captain Rodriguez was coordinating operations with chiefs from other departments. Marcus followed, keeping Bailey on a short leash, but allowing her to guide their approach. As they drew closer to the operations center, Marcus could hear the radio traffic that was painting an increasingly desperate picture. Multiple residents remained unaccounted for. Search teams were being hampered by structural instability in the northern building, and the fire was spreading toward buildings that hadn't yet been fully evacuated. "We need more search teams in buildings 2 and 3. Captain Rodriguez was saying to a group of commanders. "But we're running short on personnel, and the smoke conditions are making visibility nearly impossible." That's when Bailey broke away from Marcus and approached Captain Rodriguez directly. The dog sat calmly beside the command post and looked up at the captain with the kind of patient attention that somehow cut through all the surrounding chaos. Rodriguez looked down at Bailey, then at Marcus. "Hale, I thought I told you to keep that dog away from active operations. Captain, Bailey has search and rescue training. She might be able to help locate people in areas where visibility is compromised." "This isn't the time for experiments, Hale." But before Rodriguez could say more, Tom Chun appeared at Marcus's shoulder, having just completed a search of Building 3 with his team. Tom's face was streaked with soot, and his voice was hoarse from smoke exposure. "Captain, we've cleared most of Building 3, but we're getting reports of an elderly woman who may still be trapped on the 2nd floor. The smoke is so thick up there that we can barely see our own hands, and the heat is becoming dangerous." Marcus looked at Bailey, who was watching the conversation with obvious understanding. He made a decision that would have surprised him a month ago. "Captain, give us 10 minutes. Bailey can work in smoke conditions that would stop human searchers, and she's trained to locate people who are unconscious or unable to respond to calls. Rodriguez looked at the growing fire, at the accumulating reports of missing residents, and at Bailey's calm, confident demeanor. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he nodded. 10 minutes, Holly. Radio contact every 2 minutes, and if conditions deteriorate, you evacuate immediately. Marcus and Bailey approached Building 3 through the courtyard, passing groups of evacuated residents who were being treated by paramedics. An elderly man with oxygen mask clutched Marcus's arm as they walked past. "There's a woman on the second floor," he gasped between breaths. "Mrs. Washington, apartment 2C. She uses a walker. Couldn't get out on her own." Building 3's stairwell was filled with smoke so thick that Marcus's flashlight beam barely penetrated 3 feet ahead. The temperature was rising rapidly as the fire spread from the adjacent structure, and Marcus could hear the ominous sounds of stressed building materials throughout the structure. Bailey moved up the stairs with sure-footed confidence, pausing occasionally to test the air with her nose but never hesitating in her forward progress. When they reached the second-floor landing, she immediately turned toward the left corridor and began working her way past doors marked with apartment numbers. The hallway was a tunnel of heat and smoke, with visibility reduced to mere inches. Marcus followed Bailey by keeping one hand on her harness, trusting her completely to navigate toward whatever she was seeking. His radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice. "Search team, report status." "Second floor, west corridor," Marcus responded. "Bailey's working the scent. Still mobile." They passed apartments 2A and 2B without Bailey showing interest. But when they reached 2C, she stopped abruptly and began pawing at the door. Marcus tried the handle and found it unlocked. The apartment beyond was filled with smoke, but Bailey moved through it with the confidence of someone following a clear trail. She led Marcus through a small living room, past a kitchen where he could barely make out the outline of appliances, and toward what appeared to be a bedroom. There, collapsed, beside an overturned walker, was an elderly African-American woman who appeared to be unconscious but breathing. Bailey positioned herself protectively beside the woman while Marcus checked for injuries and prepared to carry her to safety. Mrs. Washington was conscious but disoriented, coughing weakly as Marcus lifted her into his arms. Bailey led them back, through the apartment and into the hallway, where the smoke conditions had worsened significantly during their brief search. The descent to the first floor felt like it took hours, though Marcus's watch later showed it had been fewer than 6 minutes. Bailey maintained her position ahead of them, occasionally looking back to ensure they were following, until they emerged into the relative clarity of the building's main entrance. Paramedics immediately took charge of Mrs. Washington, beginning oxygen therapy and assessment procedures that would determine whether she needed hospitalization. As Marcus watched the medical team work, he felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction that came from successful rescue operations. But Bailey's behavior suggested their work wasn't finished. Instead of relaxing after the successful search, she remained alert and focused, her attention directed toward Building 2, where smoke was beginning to pour from upper-story windows. "What is it, girl?" Bailey moved toward Building 2 with the same purposeful energy she had shown before finding Mrs. Washington. Marcus followed, though he was beginning to feel the effects of smoke exposure and physical exertion. As they approached the building's entrance, they were met by Sarah and Jake, who had somehow learned about the fire and had come to the scene looking for Marcus. "Dad," Jake called out, running toward them with Sarah close behind. "Are you okay?" "We heard about the fire on the news and I'm fine," Marcus interrupted, though he realized he probably looked anything but fine. His uniform was torn, his face was streaked with soot, and he was breathing heavily from the search operation. Sarah reached them and immediately began examining Marcus for injuries. "Marcus, you look terrible. Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, but Bailey thinks there might be more people in Building 2. Marcus looked at his wife and son, suddenly aware that his decision to work with Bailey in an active fire scene had put him at risk in ways that affected more than just his own safety. "Dad," Jake said, looking at Bailey with obvious admiration. "She found someone, didn't she?" Marcus nodded. "An elderly woman who couldn't evacuate on her own. Bailey led me right to her." Sarah's expression shifted from concern to something approaching pride. "She really is remarkable." But before Marcus could respond, Bailey began moving toward Building 2 with increasing urgency. Her behavior suggested that whatever she sensed in that structure required immediate attention, and Marcus found himself facing the most important decision of his career. He could return to the command post, report the successful rescue of Mrs. Washington, and allow other search teams to handle Building 2. It would be the safe choice, the professionally appropriate choice, and the choice that would ensure he went home to his family that evening. Or he could trust Bailey's instincts one more time, knowing that doing so might put him in greater danger than he had ever faced as a firefighter. Marcus looked at Sarah and Jake, then at Bailey, who was waiting for his decision with the patient attention that had become the defining characteristic of their partnership. "I have to follow her," he said finally. "There's someone in that building who needs help, and Bailey's the only one who can find them in time." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm before he could follow Bailey toward Building 2. "Marcus, no. You've already done enough. Let someone else handle it." But Bailey had moved to the building's entrance and was looking back at Marcus with an expression of such urgent intensity that he couldn't ignore her message. Someone in Building 2 needed immediate help, and conventional search teams would require precious time to organize and deploy. "Sarah, I have to trust her. Bailey's never been wrong about these situations." Jake stepped forward, his young face serious with understanding beyond his 16 years. "Mom, Dad has to go." That's what Grandpa would have done. The reference to his father hit Marcus with unexpected force. Jake was right. Michael Hall would never have hesitated if he believed someone's life hung in the balance. But Marcus also realized that his father's unwavering commitment to rescue operations had ultimately cost him his life, leaving behind a wife and son who needed him. 5 minutes, Marcus said, looking directly at Sarah. "Bailey and I will do a quick sweep of the first floor, and if we don't find anyone immediately, we'll evacuate and let other teams take over." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. 5 minutes. Promise me." Marcus kissed her forehead and touched Jake's shoulder, then turned toward Building 2 with Bailey leading the way. As they entered the structure, Marcus radioed their position to Captain Rodriguez, who responded with obvious frustration. "Hale, you're exceeding your authorized search time. Return to the command post immediately." "Copy, Captain." Bailey's indicating someone in Building 2. "Give us 5 minutes to confirm." The first floor of Building 2 showed heavy smoke infiltration, but remained structurally sound. Bailey moved through the corridors with systematic efficiency, checking each apartment while Marcus followed with his flashlight and radio. They cleared 4 apartments without finding anyone, and Marcus began to hope Bailey might have been mistaken. But when they reached apartment 1E, Bailey's behavior changed dramatically. She began scratching at the door and whining with an urgency that Marcus had learned to interpret as indication of immediate danger. The apartment door was locked, but Marcus could hear sounds from inside, not voices, but the kind of movement that suggested someone was conscious but unable to reach the door. Using his axe, Marcus forced the lock and entered the smoke-filled apartment. Bailey immediately led him toward what appeared to be a bathroom, where they found a man in his 60s who had collapsed while trying to evacuate. The man was conscious, but disoriented, apparently overcome by smoke while attempting to dress for evacuation. "Sir, I'm with the fire department. We're here to help you." The man looked up at Marcus with confusion and relief. "I see OULDN single quotes T. The smoke came so fast. I got dizzy and fell. Marcus helped the man to his feet, noting signs of smoke inhalation but no obvious injuries. Bailey positioned herself on the man's other side, providing stability as they began moving toward the apartment door. But as they reached the corridor, Marcus's radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice, and the message sent ice through his veins. All personnel evacuate Building 2 immediately. Structure is compromised. Repeat, evacuate Building 2 now. Through the smoke-filled hallway, Marcus could see the orange glow of flames that had reached the building's interior. The fire was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and they were now trapped on the first floor of a structure that was about to become fully engulfed. Bailey seemed to understand the urgency of their situation. Instead of heading toward the main entrance they had used to enter the building, she turned toward the rear of the structure, leading Marcus and the evacuee toward what appeared to be a service corridor. "Bailey, where are you taking us?" The dog moved with absolute confidence through smoke, so thick that Marcus could barely see her golden coat 3 feet ahead of him. The man he was supporting was becoming heavier as smoke inhalation sapped his strength, and Marcus's own breathing was becoming labored despite his protective equipment. They reached a door at the rear of the building that opened onto a small loading dock Marcus hadn't known existed. Bailey had somehow identified an exit route that avoided the main corridors where fire was spreading most rapidly. As they emerged into the evening air, Marcus was met by paramedics who immediately took charge of the evacuee. Captain Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's side, his expression mixing relief with frustration. "Hale, that was the most reckless thing I've ever seen a firefighter do. You exceeded your authorized search time, ignored direct orders to evacuate, and put civilian lives at risk." Marcus accepted the criticism because he knew Rodriguez was right. He had violated protocol and endangered both himself and the man he had rescued by remaining in the building after evacuation orders had been given. But he also knew that without Bailey's guidance, the man in apartment 1E would have died from smoke inhalation within minutes of their departure. Her ability to navigate through conditions that had defeated human searches, and her knowledge of building layouts that exceeded conventional understanding had made the difference between life and death. "Captain, I understand your concerns, but Bailey saved that man's life. No human search team could have reached him in time." Rodriguez looked at Bailey, who was sitting calmly beside Marcus, despite having just guided them through one of the most dangerous rescue operations in the department's recent history. "I don't care how talented that dog is, Hale. This is a professional fire department, not a circus act. We follow protocols and chain of command, not the instincts of animals." Before Marcus could respond, Tom Chan approached the group, having just completed evacuation operations in Building 4. Tom's face showed the exhaustion that came from hours of intensive rescue work, but his expression brightened when he saw Bailey. "Is this the dog that found Mrs. Washington and Mr. Patterson?" Marcus nodded. Bailey located both of them in conditions where human searchers would have required much more time. Tom knelt beside Bailey and examined her carefully. "She doesn't look like she's suffering from smoke inhalation. How is that possible?" The question highlighted something Marcus had noticed but hadn't fully processed. Despite spending extended time in smoke-filled buildings, Bailey showed none of the respiratory distress that typically affected both humans and animals exposed to fire conditions. Her breathing remained normal, her energy level seemed unaffected, and her alertness remained sharp. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But she's been working in these conditions for over an hour without showing any signs of fatigue or respiratory compromise." Captain Rodriguez studied Bailey with new interest. "That's medically impossible. Even trained search and rescue dogs require respiratory protection in heavy smoke environments." As if responding to the attention, Bailey rose and moved toward Building 3, where smoke was still pouring from upper-story windows. Her behavior suggested she detected something that required investigation, and Marcus felt the familiar tug of trust that had guided their partnership from the beginning. "Captain, Bailey thinks there might be someone else." "Absolutely not, High. Buildings 2 and 3 are both compromised structures. No more unauthorized search operations." But even as Rodriguez spoke, a woman emerged from the crowd of evacuated residents and approached their group. She was elderly, walking with the assistance of a cane, and her face showed the kind of desperate worry that Marcus had learned to recognize in family members of missing people. "Please," she said, addressing Captain Rodriguez directly, "my husband is in apartment 3B. He was taking medication when the alarms went off, and I couldn't get him to move fast enough. The smoke was so thick by the time we reached the stairwell that we got separated." Rodriguez looked at the woman, then at Building 3, where conditions were clearly deteriorating. Standard protocol required accounting for all residents before declaring search operations complete, but the building's structural integrity was becoming questionable. "Ma'am, we've had search teams throughout Building 3. If your husband was there, we would have found him." "He has dementia," the woman continued. "When he gets confused, he hides in the bedroom closet. It's where he feels safe. Please, he's all I have left." Marcus looked at Bailey, who was watching the conversation with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood both the woman's distress and the location she was describing. The dog's body language indicated readiness to work, and Marcus found himself facing another decision that would define his career and his understanding of what it meant to serve others. The elderly woman's words hung in the air like smoke itself, heavy with desperation and love that transcended rational fear. Marcus looked at her tear-streaked face, then at Bailey, who had positioned herself between the woman and Building 3 as if she understood exactly what was being asked. "Ma'am, what's your husband's name?" Marcus asked. "Robert." "Robert Martinez. We've been married 53 years. Her voice broke slightly. "He gets so frightened when he can't understand what's happening. The closet in our bedroom is where he goes when the world feels too big." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression showing the conflict between operational safety and human compassion that defined the most difficult aspects of firefighting. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand your concern, but Building 3 is no longer safe for search operations. The structural integrity has been compromised by fire damage." "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "Bailey found Mrs. Washington in conditions where we couldn't see 3 feet ahead. If Mr. Martinez is hiding in a closet, conventional search teams might miss him even under ideal conditions." Rodriguez looked at Marcus with the kind of measured evaluation that suggested he was weighing factors beyond immediate protocol. Around them, the fire continued to spread. Emergency vehicles arrived and departed with rescued residents, and the coordinated chaos of major incident response continued. "Hale, if I authorize this search, it will be the last unauthorized operation I permit tonight. You and Bailey will have exactly 10 minutes to locate Mr. Martinez and evacuate. If you encounter any structural instability, any change in fire conditions, or any other hazard, you evacuate immediately." Marcus nodded, understanding that Rodriguez was taking a significant professional risk by authorizing the search. If anything went wrong, the captain would face questions about why he had permitted civilian animal assistance in a major emergency operation. 10 minutes, Captain. We'll find him." Bailey seemed to understand that she had been given official permission to work. She moved toward Building 3 with the kind of focused energy Marcus had learned to recognize as her transition into professional search mode. Mrs. Martinez grabbed Marcus's hand before he could follow Bailey. Apartment 3B is on the 3rd floor, rear of the building. The bedroom closet is small, on the left side as you enter the room. Robert will be sitting on the floor, probably with his hands over his ears. The detail about Robert's likely position suggested Mrs. Martinez had found her husband hiding in similar circumstances before. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Well, bring him home to you." Building 3's stairwell was significantly more compromised than it had been during Marcus's earlier search. The temperature had risen dramatically, smoke conditions had worsened, and Marcus could hear the kind of structural sounds that indicated the building was under severe stress. Bailey climbed the stairs with steady determination, but Marcus noticed. She was moving more carefully than usual, testing each step before committing her full weight. Even her extraordinary abilities had limits when confronted with genuine structural instability. The second-floor landing showed evidence of fire damage: scorched walls, melted fixtures, and the acrid smell of burned synthetic materials. Bailey paused here, testing the air carefully before continuing toward the third floor. "Radio check, search team." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through Marcus's headset. "Third floor landing, moving toward apartment 3B, Marcus responded. "Structural conditions marginal, but manageable." The third-floor corridor was the most dangerous environment Marcus had ever worked in. Smoke was so thick that his flashlight beam disappeared completely after 2 feet. The temperature was approaching the limits of what his protective equipment could handle, and the floor felt unstable beneath his feet. Bailey moved through these conditions with remarkable confidence, but Marcus could see that even she was being affected by the extreme environment. Her pace had slowed, and she was breathing more heavily than he had ever observed. They found apartment 3B halfway down the corridor, its door slightly ajar. Bailey immediately began working her way through the apartment, which showed signs of hasty evacuation: overturned furniture, scattered personal belongings, and the kind of disorder that suggested someone had left in panic. The bedroom was at the rear of the apartment, and Bailey led Marcus directly to a closet door that was closed. She sat beside the door and looked up at Marcus with the expression that meant "found him." Marcus opened the closet door carefully, his flashlight revealing exactly what Mrs. Martinez had described: an elderly man sitting on the floor with his hands pressed over his ears, rocking slightly back and forth. Robert Martinez looked up at the light with confusion and fear. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Marcus with the fire department. Your wife sent me to find you. We need to leave the building right now." Robert's response was exactly what Marcus had hoped for: immediate recognition that someone had come to help, followed by cooperation as Marcus helped him to his feet. Bailey positioned herself on Robert's other side, providing stability and comfort as they began the journey back through the apartment. But as they reached the corridor, Marcus heard a sound that stopped his heart: the deep, groaning crack of major structural failure somewhere in the building. His radio immediately came alive with Captain Rodriguez's urgent voice: "All personnel evacuate Building 3 immediately. Major structural collapse imminent. This is not a drill." Marcus looked at the distance between their current position and the stairwell, calculating whether they could reach safety before the building's collapse. The math was not encouraging. Robert Martinez was moving slowly due to age and confusion. The corridor was filled with obstacles and hazards, and Bailey was showing signs of fatigue from extended exposure to extreme conditions. "Bailey, fastest route out," Marcus said, hoping. The dog's knowledge of building layouts extended to emergency exits he might not know about. Bailey's response surprised him. Instead of heading toward the main stairwell, she turned toward the opposite end of the corridor, leading them toward what appeared to be a fire exit. Marcus hadn't noticed during their approach. The fire exit opened onto an external fire escape that Marcus couldn't have seen from the building's front. Bailey had somehow identified an evacuation route that would get them to ground level without using the main stairwell that was most likely to be compromised by structural collapse. The descent down the fire escape felt like it took hours, though Marcus's watch later showed it had been less than 4 minutes. Robert Martinez moved carefully but steadily, motivated by the understanding that his life depended on reaching the ground quickly. They were still 20 feet above ground level when Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of major structural failure. From inside the building, through the fire escape's metal grating, he could see dust and debris beginning to fall as portions of Building 3's internal structure gave way. Bailey seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. She positioned herself below Robert on the fire escape, providing a safety barrier in case. The elderly man lost his footing during their final descent. They reached the ground just as the building's main stairwell collapsed, sending a shower of debris and dust across the courtyard. Emergency personnel immediately surrounded them, with paramedics taking charge of Robert Martinez while Captain Rodriguez approached Marcus with an expression that combined relief with professional concern. "Hale, that was cutting it closer than I'm comfortable with. But you found him." Marcus looked around for Bailey and spotted her being examined by a veterinary emergency responder who had been standing by for exactly this type of situation. The dog appeared tired but uninjured, and her tail wagged slowly when she saw Marcus. Watching her, Mrs. Martinez appeared at Marcus's side, tears streaming down her face as she watched paramedics evaluate her husband. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." Marcus accepted her gratitude, but he knew that Bailey had been the true hero of the rescue operation. The dog had navigated through impossible conditions, identified a victim no human searcher would have found, and discovered an evacuation route. That had saved all their lives. As the immediate chaos of the rescue began to settle, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of his profession. For 18 years, he had been searching for opportunities to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. But tonight, working with Bailey to save Robert Martinez, Mrs. Washington, and the man from Building 2, Marcus had discovered that heroism wasn't about individual achievement or dramatic gestures. True heroism was about partnership, trust, and the willingness to combine your abilities with others to accomplish what none of you could achieve alone. Bailey hadn't made Marcus a hero. She had shown him that he had always possessed the qualities necessary for meaningful service. What he had been missing was the confidence to trust those qualities and the wisdom to accept help when it was offered. Sarah and Jake appeared at Marcus's side as paramedics finished their evaluation of Robert Martinez. The elderly man was conscious, alert, and showing no signs of serious injury beyond mild smoke inhalation. "Dad, you saved 3 people tonight," Jake said, his voice filled with the kind of pride Marcus had always hoped to hear from his son, Bailey. "And I saved 3 people," Marcus corrected. This was teamwork, not individual heroism. Sarah wrapped her arms around Marcus, holding him close despite the soot and smoke smell that clung to his uniform. "I was terrified watching you go back into that building, but I was also proud. You did what needed to be done." Marcus looked over Sarah's shoulder at Bailey, who was sitting calmly beside the veterinary responder, accepting attention and treats, as if major building rescues were routine parts of her day. The dog's calm demeanor belied the extraordinary courage and intelligence she had demonstrated throughout the evening. Captain Rodriguez approached their group, carrying a clipboard that suggested official documentation of the incident was beginning. "Ale, I need to debrief you about tonight's operations, but first, I want to say something." Marcus prepared himself for criticism about protocol violations and unauthorized animal assistance. "What you and Bailey accomplished tonight exceeded anything I've seen in 25 years of firefighting. 3 successful rescues under conditions that would have challenged our best search teams. And you did it with coordination and professionalism that made the difference between life and death for those people." The captain's praise meant more to Marcus than any medal or commendation could have. Rodriguez represented the kind of professional competence Marcus had always respected. and earning his approval felt like validation of everything Marcus and Bailey had built together. "Thank you, Captain. But I need to be honest about something." Marcus took a deep breath, preparing to reveal what he had learned about the network that had orchestrated his partnership with Bailey. "Bailey and I didn't meet by chance. There were people who arranged for us to work together because they thought I needed help." Rodriguez listened as Marcus explained about David Chun's network, about the deliberate placement of therapy animals with struggling first responders, and about the years of observation that had preceded Bailey's introduction to his life. When Marcus finished, Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying Bailey with new understanding. "Hale, does it matter how you and Bailey met, or does it matter what you've accomplished together?" The question echoed what Tom Chun had asked him days earlier, but now Marcus understood the answer with absolute clarity. The circumstances that had brought him and Bailey together were less important than what they had chosen to build with the opportunity they had been given. "It matters what we've accomplished," Marcus said. "The Bailey and I have developed something real, regardless of how it started." "Then that's what I'll include in my report. Outstanding performance by a firefighter animal team that demonstrated exceptional rescue capabilities under extreme conditions." As the emergency operation wound down and equipment was secured for return to stations throughout the city, Marcus found himself thinking about his father's journal entry regarding the importance of showing up consistently for people who needed help. Tonight, he and Bailey had shown up for Mrs. Washington, for the man in Building 2, and for Robert Martinez. They had made the difference between life and death for 3 people who might otherwise have been forgotten casualties of a major fire. But more importantly, they had demonstrated that meaningful service didn't require martyrdom or individual heroism. It required partnership, trust, and the willingness to use whatever gifts you possessed in service to others. Marcus looked at Bailey, who was watching him with the patient attention that had become the foundation of their working relationship. Tomorrow, they would return to routine calls and standard operations. But tonight had proven that when circumstances required extraordinary measures, they were ready to meet the challenge together. The singed family photograph Marcus pulled from his jacket pocket had been rescued from one of the apartments they had searched. The image showed a young family, parents with 2 small children, smiling at the camera with the kind of uncomplicated happiness that made Marcus understand why his father had been willing to risk everything to preserve what mattered most to people. Marcus carefully placed the photograph in an evidence bag that would ensure its return to the family who had lost their home but kept their lives. It was a small gesture, but it represented something larger, the understanding that every rescue was about preserving love, connection, and hope for the future. As they prepared to leave the scene, Bailey moved to Marcus's side and sat calmly, waiting for whatever came next. Her presence was reassuring in the way that only comes from perfect trust and mutual respect. Marcus realized he was no longer searching for proof that his life had meaning or purpose. Working with Bailey had taught him that meaning wasn't something you found. It was something you created through consistent choice to help others, moment by moment, day by day. 6 months after the Riverside Manor fire, Marcus sat at his desk in Station 19's training room, putting the finishing touches on a manual that would have seemed impossible to imagine just a year earlier. The document, titled Integrating Therapy Animals in Emergency Response, a comprehensive training guide, represented months of careful research, documentation, and collaboration with animal behaviorists, emergency response specialists, and firefighters from 6 different departments. Bailey lay on her customary spot beside Marcus's desk, wearing the official vest that identified her as a certified member of Station 19's response team. The bright red fabric bore the fire department's logo, along with her name and certification number, marking her transition from unofficial partner to recognized professional colleague. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Following the Riverside Manor incident Captain Rodriguez had faced pointed questions from department administrators about protocol violations and unauthorized animal deployment, but the undeniable success of Bailey's rescue operations, combined with media coverage that portrayed the fire department in overwhelmingly positive terms, had created momentum for formal evaluation of animal-assisted emergency response. Marcus's proposal had evolved into a pilot program that attracted attention from emergency management officials throughout the region. Bailey had undergone additional certification through professional animal training organizations. Marcus had completed specialized courses in animal handling and emergency coordination, and together they had developed training protocols that other departments could adapt to their own needs. The manual Marcus was completing would be distributed to fire departments in 12 states, accompanied by video training materials that documented Bailey's techniques and their applications in various emergency scenarios. More importantly, the program had attracted funding from federal emergency management agencies interested in innovative approaches to search and rescue operations. "How's the writing coming along?" Sarah asked, entering the training room with 2 cups of coffee and settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "Almost finished." This section covers post-incident care for both human and animal team members. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully and gestured toward the stack of papers that represented his evening's work. "I never thought I'd become a technical writer, but documenting everything Bailey knows has been fascinating." Bailey lifted her head at the mention of her name, her tail thumping against the floor in acknowledgement. Even after months of working together officially, Marcus continued to be amazed by the dog's ability to understand context and respond appropriately to complex situations. "Jake called while you were writing," Sarah said. "He wanted to remind you about the presentation tomorrow." Marcus smiled at the thought of his son's enthusiasm for the program. Jake had become Bailey's unofficial photographer and social media coordinator, documenting their training sessions and emergency responses with the kind of attention to detail that had impressed professional journalists. More importantly, Jake's involvement had created opportunities for father-son collaboration that had been missing from their relationship for years. Is he still planning to use this for his senior project? He's already outlined the whole thing. The evolution of emergency response, how animals and humans partner to save lives. His advisor says it's college-level research. The pride in Sarah's voice reflected broader changes in their family dynamic. Marcus's work with Bailey had restored his sense of purpose and engagement in ways that had strengthened his relationships at home as well as at the station. He no longer spent evenings questioning the meaning of his career or wondering whether his contributions mattered. Tom Chen appeared in the doorway of the training room, still wearing his uniform from the day shift. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you and Bailey." Mrs. Chen walked slowly into the room, moving with the careful precision of someone still recovering from cardiac surgery, but determined to regain her independence. She had been discharged from the hospital 2 weeks earlier and was staying with Tom's family while completing her rehabilitation. "Mrs. Chen, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." "The doctors say I should make a complete recovery." She approached Bailey, who rose to greet her with gentle enthusiasm. "I wanted to see how you two were adjusting to your new official status." Over the months since discovering David Chum's files, Marcus had developed a deeper appreciation for the network that had brought him and Bailey together. Rather than feeling manipulated or deceived, he had come to understand their intervention as an act of service that honored both his father's memory and his own potential for a meaningful contribution. Mrs. Chun had become an informal advisor to the therapy animal program, sharing insights from her late husband's research and helping to identify other first responders who might benefit from similar partnerships. Her knowledge of animal behavior and emergency response psychology had proven invaluable in developing training protocols. "We're doing well," Marcus said. But Bailey's adapted to the formal structure. and I've learned to trust her instincts even more completely than before." Mrs. Chun smiled and knelt carefully beside Bailey, scratching the dog's ears with obvious affection. "David would be so proud of what you've accomplished. He always believed that the best emergency response comes from partnerships that honor both human expertise and animal intuition." The reference to David Chun no longer carried the weight of obligation or manipulation that Marcus had initially felt. Instead, it represented connection to a larger community of people who understood that meaningful service often required accepting help from unexpected sources. Emma Weatherby and her parents arrived for the ceremony that would officially recognize Bailey's contributions to emergency response. Emma, now 8 years old and fully recovered from her experience in the Maple Street fire, had maintained a special relationship with Bailey that transcended their dramatic first meeting. "Bailey," Emma called out, running toward the dog with the uncomplicated joy that characterized all their interactions. Bailey's response to Emma remained one of the most touching aspects of their partnership. The dog seemed to understand that Emma represented the reason for all their training and preparation, the child whose life had been saved through their collaboration, and whose future had been preserved by their willingness to trust each other. Completely, Mr. and Mrs. Weatherby approached Marcus with the kind of gratitude that never diminished despite the passage of time. "Mr. Hale, we can't thank you and Bailey enough for what you've given us," Mrs. Weatherby said. "Emma talks about you two constantly. Bailey was the hero that day," Marcus replied. "I just followed her lead. And that's exactly what made the difference," Mr. Weatherby added. "You trusted her when anyone else might have doubted." Captain Rodriguez entered the training room, carrying an official-looking document and wearing the kind of expression that suggested something important was about to happen. "Marcus, if you and Bailey are ready, I'd like to conduct the official certification ceremony." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Rodriguez read from the document that officially recognized Bailey as a certified member of Station 19's emergency response team, with full authorization to participate in search and rescue operations under Marcus's supervision. Bailey sat at attention throughout the reading, as if she understood the significance of the moment. When Rodriguez finished, he presented Marcus with Bailey's official identification card and badge, making their partnership legally recognized within the fire department's operational structure. The badge was smaller than human versions, but carried the same authority and responsibility. "Congratulations, both of you," Rodriguez said. "You've earned this recognition through performance that exceeded every expectation." Mrs. Martinez and her husband Robert attended the ceremony, representing the lives that had been saved through Marcus and Bailey's partnership. Robert had recovered completely from his experience in the Riverside Manor fire, and his gratitude remained as genuine as it had been on the night of his rescue. "Bailey found me when I couldn't find myself," Robert said, his voice carrying the tremor that sometimes affected his speech. "She brought me back to my family." As the ceremony concluded and guests began to leave, Marcus found himself alone with Bailey in the training room that had become their shared workspace. The walls were covered with certificates, training schedules, and photographs, documenting their partnership's evolution from unofficial collaboration to recognized program. One photograph particularly caught Marcus's attention, Bailey wearing her new vest, sitting beside Engine 19 with Marcus and the rest of Station 19's crew. The image captured something that no amount of documentation could fully convey: the sense of belonging and purpose that came from being part of something larger than individual achievement. Marcus opened his father's journal to the passage he had memorized months earlier. "Bravery is showing up consistently for people who need help, even when no one is watching and no one will remember your name." But Marcus now understood that his father had been only partially correct. Bravery was indeed about consistent service, but the most meaningful service happened in partnerships that amplified individual capabilities through trust and collaboration. Bailey looked up at Marcus with the patient attention that had become the foundation of their working relationship. Tomorrow, they would respond to emergency calls, conduct training exercises, and continue developing techniques that other departments could use to enhance their own rescue capabilities. But tonight, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing his life had meaning beyond his own needs and ambitions. He had found his purpose not through individual heroism, but through partnership with a remarkable animal who had taught him that the most important rescues often involved saving each other. Marcus carefully closed the training manual and placed it in the folder that would carry it to printing services tomorrow morning. The document represented thousands of hours of work, observation, and collaboration, but its true value lay in its potential to help other firefighters discover what Marcus had learned through Bailey's guidance. As they prepared to leave Station 19 for the evening, Bailey moved to Marcus's side with the calm confidence that characterized all their interactions. Her presence was reassuring in ways that transcended professional partnership. She had become family, colleague, and teacher, all embodied in the form of a golden retriever who had appeared through smoke and flame to show Marcus what courage really meant. Walking toward his truck with Bailey at his side, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them from that burning house on Maple Street to this moment of official recognition and expanding purpose. The path hadn't always been clear, and the destination had never been certain. But the partnership itself had provided direction and meaning that individual effort could never have achieved. Bailey jumped into the passenger seat with practiced ease, settling in for the drive home where Sarah and Jake would be waiting to hear about the ceremony. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Marcus faced the future with the confidence that came from knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, with exactly the right partner beside him. The golden retriever who had once appeared through smoke to guide him toward purpose had become the teacher who showed him that the most profound moments of service happen not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet trust between partners, committed to helping others find their way home.